Hello and welcome to Pastor's Perspective, sponsored by Biola University, ranked as the most comprehensively Christian university in North America. My name is Brian Perez, and we are here live on this Wednesday, the 18th of September, 2024, and we would love to chat with you at 888-564-6173. 888-564-6173 is our number. You can also watch us on Facebook and on YouTube. And there are two other ways you can get your question to us aside from calling 888-564-6173, and that's to send us a message on the Facebook, Messenger feature, or by direct messaging us on Instagram, or by going to our flagship radio station's website, kwave.com. Look for the Pastor's Perspective page and fill out the form, and that'll get your question to us. But that's not the best way to get your question to us. You can send us your question, and we might read it on the program the next day. But the best way to get an answer is to call us when we're here live, like today, till 4 p.m. Pacific time at 888-564-6173. And answering your questions today, we've got Brian Brodersen, the senior pastor of Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa in Southern California, Bobby Conway, the senior pastor of Image Church in Charlotte, North Carolina, and here in the studio with me is Dr. Scott Rae, the professor of Christian ethics at the Talbot School of Theology at Biola University. Bobby and Scott have never met each other, so Bobby, tell Scott a little about yourself, and Scott, tell Bobby a little bit about yourself.
Well, I need to say how excited I am because I definitely am familiar with Scott Rae and love his work and ethics and his book, Moral Choices. I've read a few times. And so what a privilege to be on with you, Scott, and so glad to get a chance to connect with you here today.
Well, thank you, Bobby. Appreciate that very much. I figure anybody who's been reading my books is okay by me,
especially twice.
That's right. That's more than my students do.
That's great. Well, now that we have the introductions aside, today is a very, very special day here at K-Wave Studios because it is somebody's birthday. And it's somebody's
Dr. Scott,
birthday
it's your
who
birthday.
is in this room, and it's not my birthday, and it's not Scott's birthday.
Yes.
So it must be Brian Perez's birthday.
It is.
Yes.
Thank you.
So I will spare everybody the singing of Happy Birthday, but I'm going to trust that people at home right now are just going to sit before their radio and sing.
Sing to their radio.
Yeah. So
perfect.
So happy birthday.
How
old are you? Do you want to tell? Or
no, I don't.
Happy birthday, bro.
I don't. I don't want to tell.
Okay, I know that's intrusive to ask that question.
Yes. And if you keep asking, I'll tell human resources that you keep asking. Then again, you're the boss, so you'd be able to find out anyway.
Well, I'm not exempt from discipline by HR. Yeah, I mean, that's the way it works here. So.
No, not going to do that. But 888-564-6173 is the number to call us today with your questions. And so great. Bobby is a big fan of Dr. Scott Rae's work, and
and the Think Biblically podcast. I
bless
hear
your
Scott's
heart
voice
for
every
mentioning
week.
that too.
I love that. Yes, it's so great. You and Sean do a wonderful job.
Thank you.
I love it too, and I've listened to it for years, and I can never remember the name of it. It's just absolutely I do not know how I always call it like biblically speaking, or I come up with different things.
I would think from somebody who thinks biblically as well as you do, you should be able to remember
and
that.
I would think like thinking biblically is what you guys do. So it makes perfect sense. So, okay, Lord, help me not to forget that again.
You could get it tattooed on your arm or something.
Yeah. I'll be, advertising for them. Get a
Yes.
big tat.
Yes, perfect.
Yeah.
888-564-6173 is the number to call. Now, Dr. Scott, as I mentioned, is a professor of philosophy and Christian ethics at Biola University's Talbot School of Theology. If you have a question about ethics, including bioethics, medical ethics, death and dying ethics, or medical ethics, or on abortion, euthanasia, the death penalty, or religion and American culture, today would be a great day for you to call. 888-564-6173. You might remember last Wednesday we had Dr. Scott Rae on with us, and we had lots of great conversation with you guys, and we couldn't get to all of your phone calls, so especially if you couldn't get on last Wednesday, we would love to hear from you. Maybe you heard us discuss something on last Wednesday's program that you'd like to follow up on. 888-564-6173 is our number. We're going to start with a question that was sent in online. Do you mind passing those down to me, Dr. Rae? That way I can
There you go.
read one of them here. This one is from CJ, who is in Surprise, Arizona. Surprise! And here is CJ's question. Is religion and belief in God declining in America or anywhere, and should Christians be concerned about this? Dr. Rae, what would you say?
I would say it depends on where you're talking about. In Europe, for example, belief in God has been declining for some time, although I think it's making a bit of a comeback because even some of the most vocal critics of Christianity, like Richard Dawkins, have acknowledged the social value of Christianity for their culture. And in fact, Dawkins has said he does not want to live in a culture that has not been deeply influenced by Christian faith.
Yeah.
Even though he rejects, almost all of it personally.
Yeah.
In the United States, I think there's this phenomena of the nuns.
Yeah.
And what we've discovered through the research we've done, mainly through our friend Ryan Burge, who's a political scientist,
Right.
And he's probably done the best tracking of all of this, is that the nuns really refers more to church attendance and regular church attendance, as opposed to belief in God or losing someone's faith. Most of the nuns have given up going to church, but they haven't given up their faith.
Yeah.
Although I'm not exactly sure how you can have a thriving faith without being involved in a church community, but it is somewhat encouraging to me to know that they are not giving up their faith.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think the initial assumption was that maybe the nuns or people who were becoming atheists, not identifying, with any kind of a religious group. But then, like you said, through the research, it's finding, no, they're not really rejecting belief in God. They are just not going to church or to synagogue or to, wherever.
Yeah, the figures on atheism they've held pretty steady over the last 30, 40 years.
Yeah. Even with all the efforts of the, that season when we had the New Atheist, you're mentioning Europe, and I think you guys have connected with Justin Briley.
Yes, we have.
The surprising rebirth of belief in God, which is such an amazing book. Bobby and I interviewed Justin, actually before the book came out, right when it was coming out. But then he followed up the book with this tremendous podcast. Who I've just listened to.
That unbelievable podcast is unbelievable.
It is, yeah. Yeah, so it is so good. And he's highlighting people in the culture, people who are, significant in their various academic fields or even in, entertainment world and things like that, who have a testimony of how just, they surprisingly came to put their trust in the Lord and Jesus. So, yeah, I love that. I just last one I listened to was the one about the French atheist. Did you hear that one?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was fantastic.
Great stuff.
You've been listening to that too, Bobby, right?
Yeah, I sure have.
Yeah, so good.
Yeah, what are your thoughts on this, Bobby?
I would agree. I think that it is interesting after the kind of slowdown of the new atheism, the stats are still the same. They might vary 1% or 2% as it relates to a person's belief in non-theism. I think that the deck has been reshuffled on the American landscape for belief in God. So where people might shift out of the church into progressive Christianity or describe themselves as a nun, while their belief in God hasn't been ultimately hijacked, there's not a clean theological picture of who God is. And I think that is true. There's a distortion happening. I also do think that there is a pruning that's taking place in the church right now, where there's been a lot of compromise. And I think that there's going to be a few waves of apostasy that we'll see. Having been a Christian for over 30 years, I've never seen the level of apostasy like we're watching right now. As an early Christian, I just thought, well, this was stuff that was happening in biblical times. And I think the first wave of apostasy has become when Christianity is no longer popular and culturally acceptable, unless you kind of give another version of it, which is culturally accommodating. So people have left the church that don't find it trendy or popular. And I think another wave of is when persecution comes to the church in America, that will further weed out some of those that don't truly believe. But I take great comfort in knowing that even though there's a lot of apostasy going on, the true church of Jesus Christ isn't shrinking. It's just being revealed. And so there would have been maybe some pseudo, believers hanging around, but we can just take comfort to know that the real church isn't shrinking. It's being revealed for what it truly is, and I think God's just doing some purging right now.
It's interesting because, as you guys know, I've spent a ton of time in Europe and the UK, and yes, indeed. I mean, there has been a kind of an atheistic worldview that has been embraced by lots and lots of people there, but. People have said to me, like, well, gosh, Christianity's, dying. Does it even exist in Europe anymore? You go into these cathedrals and nobody's there and so on and so forth. And, that is true. But what people don't realize is that they might not be in the cathedrals, but they're in the warehouses and they're in the storefronts and they're in all kinds of different places. Yep. So, I just came back, as I mentioned, I just came back from the UK where we did a great festival that we do every year, and we had close to 10,000 people there, and a fair number of unbelievers who come out of curiosity. They just wonder what is going on here, and we're seeing lots of people come to Jesus, and I think around the country too. You could say the same thing.
And I would say especially the report of the decline in belief in God is only north of the equator.
Yes.
South of the equator, Christianity and Islam, actually, the other theistic religion, they're both exploding south of the equator.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. Yeah.
I found a list of Justin Brierley's podcasts. It's called Surprising Rebirth. That's the name of his podcast. His book is called The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God. You can find that on Justin's website, which is justinbrierley.com. Brierley spelled Brierley. It's not spelled the way it sounds. I think I'm saying it right. It's
you are.
Brierley, right. But it's spelled Brierley. Yeah. And you can find the book and the podcast there. But one of the interviews that he did recently on his podcast was with Tammy Peterson, the wife of Dr. Jordan Peterson. I don't know if you've had a chance to listen to that one. I have not.
Yeah, but, I didn't listen to that one.
Okay.
But I know the story, and, she has become a Christian. She's a Catholic, but she had terminal cancer. And I think, she was healed. And I think first the daughter came to faith, and then the mother came to faith. So they're hoping the shoe will drop with Jordan.
Yeah, I'd say, being healed from terminal cancer would get my attention.
Get your attention,
for sure.
Yeah.
Bobby?
I was just going to say one of the things that I do find interesting is the absolute influence, and a lot of it for the good, of people who aren't even born-again Christians helping with this rebirth of God in our culture. So you have, Jordan Peterson and the author of Dominion, Tom Holland, Dave Rubin. And so you have these different guys that are out there. And even with what Richard Dawkins recently said, being a cultural Christian, I think that people are realizing just how bereft atheism is to come forward with a fruitful way of life. And it can't answer the biggest existential questions we face. And so science, after all, can't answer everything, even though some would have liked to have seen that to be the case.
So if an atheist maybe is listening right now and they want to have a relationship with God, or they want to know what this relationship is even about, and they're thinking, well, I don't think I can be a Christian in the traditional sense of how you guys might be Christian. Like, I can't see myself going to church every Sunday. I can't see myself, there's certain things that we have subscribed to, you could say, over the years, and in contemporary Christianity, you could say, and maybe they just find that not silly, I don't know what the right word is, but they're just like put off by it because they've been fighting against it for so long. So what do they have to do? What don't they have to do?
Well, I mean, everything you're sort of proposing there, these are the kinds of things that are addressed in this podcast that we're talking about, because this is exactly the people that Justin is sitting down with, people who, initially had no interest, some atheists, some maybe just agnostic. Last thing I want to do is become a Christian type of a person. But then just step by step, they started to investigate a little bit. They heard something or they saw something. I think of the great story of C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis, it was a journey for him to become a Christian. And he first became a theist before he actually became a Christian. And that was a journey. So the one thing that is exciting me about all of this stuff, Scott, is I love, you're kind of seeing God playing the long game with a lot of people. And I think that's so great, So I would say to somebody who's, who maybe they got in a rental car and they turned on the radio.
We're talking to that guy right now.
Here we are, because that has happened before.
Yes, it has.
And I would just say this. I would say pick up the Bible and read the Gospel of Mark. That's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. That's what I'd say. Pick up the Bible, read the Gospel of Mark for yourself, and read it with an open mind. And you could even say something like, God, if you're real, show me something here. And I guarantee that'll put you on the path.
I think what's so helpful about Justin Brierley's work is this overall idea that you don't have to sacrifice your intellect to come to faith.
Yeah,
right.
And that faith is not something that you have in the absence of evidence.
Yes.
But faith goes with the evidence, and it's trust that's exhibited that's in conjunction with good reasons and good evidence for that.
Yeah.
Very good. And again, Justin's website is called, let me find it here so I can get the exact name, The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God. So check that out on Justin's website or wherever you get your podcasts.
So it's justinbrierley.com. Is that
yes.
the website?
The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God. 888-564-6173. CJ, thank you for sending in your question on Facebook. We're going to go to the phones now. And we've got lots of good questions on the board. I hope we can get to all of them or most of them in the next 45 minutes or so, less than that. Amanda in Glendora, we're going to begin with you. Welcome to Pastor's Perspective.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for taking my call. I have a follow-up question for Dr. Ray from last week when I think you were talking about assigning a sex to a fetus through IVF. And if there was an exception for that, if maybe there was a diagnosis of hemophilia. So if you could just clarify what you were saying about that. But
sure.
The follow-up question I have regarding that is genetic testing on fetuses ethically okay? Should we as Christians still be doing that if life itself is sacred and however life comes out looking, it should still be valued. But what is the church's role in caring for the marginalized, like individuals with Down syndrome or spinal muscular atrophy?
Thank you, Amanda. You've got three really good questions there, and I'll leave our other two guests on the panel here to answer your last question about what the role the church should play. But for the first one, what I suggested was I did not say that assigning sex through IVF was okay. There's a couple different ways to choose the sex of an unborn child. And then the one I was suggesting was a sperm separating technology known as microsort, which does so before conception, which has a very high likelihood of giving you the sex that you want. And I said that in general, I don't think that's ethical because children are a gift and to be received open-handedly and without specifications. But I did say the exception to that is when you are trying to do an end run around a genetic disease that is specifically sex-linked. So, and hemophilia is one of those. And so I think that's an appropriate use of medical technology to help alleviate the effects of the general entrance of sin into the world. So just to be clear about that, what I was suggesting. Second question had to do with genetic testing in general, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's the decisions that are made as a result of the news you get back from those tests where it becomes problematic. Now, all genetic testing does is give you a diagnosis, and there are a number of different ways this can be done. Amniocentesis is one where they take some of the amniotic fluid that the baby sloughed off cells into, or you can test for genetic abnormalities through IVF. But I think that way is unethical because the embryos that have the genetic disability are automatically discarded and not implanted. So I would say there's virtually no good reason to end a pregnancy based on getting bad news back on genetic tests. And the reason for that fundamentally is that unborn children have the right to life from conception forward. But I think it's presumptuous to assume that just because someone has a genetic abnormality that they're going to have a life that's not worth living. That's highly presumptuous to assume that. In fact, I think what you'll find is if you ask most kids that have some sort of genetic abnormality, if they think they would have been better off never having been born, I think they look at you like, what a silly question that is. And I think rightly so.
Yeah.
And I think, the kids that have these genetic issues, I think, I don't want to understate how difficult it is to care for them at times, but we're getting better at treating the symptoms of a lot of these genetic abnormalities. And that is not to say that you can't have a productive, satisfying, and life that's full of purpose and joy.
Yeah, and I think along with the child maybe being perplexed by such a question, how many families would say, well, sure, there's some challenges, but we love our child or we love our little brother or sister. I know families with Down syndrome children. And they're part of the family. And I do think it's scary that people would just say, well, because of this defect, they shouldn't exist.
There are some anecdotal reports from some sort of pretty radical pro-choice people.
Yeah.
Who they admit, and I appreciate their candor in this, but they admit that they'll come across a woman pushing a kid with Down syndrome in a stroller, and they admit they catch themselves thinking, "Don't you know you could have done something to prevent this?"
Wow.
But and of course, we can eliminate any genetic disease if you'll allow us to eliminate the people who suffer from it.
Yeah.
So,
wow,
man, Bobby.
Yeah, I just finished Richard Weichardt's Hitler's Religion this afternoon. And, this motivation for Hitler, his worldview had him to believe that he was a good moral guy because he was helping the fittest to survive by killing off who he perceived to be the least fit. And among those would be those with physical disabilities. And I think in some ways where we can look at a Hitler and we could just think, how atrocious is this? Well, we're acting Hitler-like when we do the same thing with unborn, when we decide who's good enough to have life versus who's not. And this is where a Christian worldview should come to bear, that every life is endowed with dignity as one created by God, genetic defects and all. And I think that there is a very close connection to us acting like a Hitler when we get into that kind of a mode. Just because we can't see the baby doesn't mean that we won't be accountable for the same type of actions as the one like Hitler who did see.
Yeah, in fact, the only way that the justification for abortion in the case of genetic abnormality makes any sense is with the assumption that the unborn child is not a person. Because if the unborn child is a person, then the argument just goes right out the window, because we would not end the lives of 2-year-olds or teenagers with Down syndrome just because of the genetic abnormality.
Yeah.
So, and that assumption is sort of classic, reasoning in a circle.
Yeah.
Where you assume your conclusion, then come in a circle and say, "Hey, I've made my point."
Yeah. Yeah, and then if you move personhood up to a period of time and say, well, they're not really a person until they start to develop cognitively and so forth, and then you justify it that way. But this is just, this is barbarism. I mean, this is just a more modern version of what has happened over and over and over and over again in history. I just listened to an 8-part series on the French Revolution, and in that case, you have an ideology, and anybody who doesn't conform to the ideology, they just need to go because they're not getting on board. And of course, that's what happened with the communist regimes, and obviously with the Nazis. But there are plenty of people that think that way today too. So it's this stuff has always been part of fallen, sinful humanity.
Yeah, Bobby.
Sadly. Now, what about the third question about the church? Okay, go ahead, Bobby. Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, I do like how Mark Middleberg talked about giving the benefit of the doubt on personhood. He shares the example of, I think it was his wife's father or grandfather was driving down the road and saw a box in the road and happened to stop instead of run the box over. And then when he stopped, a toddler came up out of the box.
Whoa. Oh, my gosh.
Okay. So I thought, my goodness, like he gave the benefit of the doubt. And I think if I'm going to err, and I don't think we're erring because of Psalm 139, I think it's very clear that the Lord knits us together in our mother's womb. But if we're going to err, give the benefit of the doubt that life begins at conception versus coming up with some random argument for when it does. Because that gets us in all kinds of predicaments. And not only that, you can just see, the story with John the Baptist leaping in the womb of Elizabeth in the presence of Mary, who is conceived with Jesus. This kind of stuff, the same language that was used of the child inside the uterus, like brephos, is the same used of the child outside of the uterus. And so I don't think that the Bible minimizes this. And I think that is in Scott's book, if I remember correctly, that idea of those words being used that way.
Something like that. Appreciate the shout out.
Yeah.
So what was Amanda's third question?
The third question, I think, was something about the church. How does the church help or something like that. And I think that obviously the church, the church is a family, the church is a community. You need to, help one another, work with one another. If in the case, we have a ministry here called Limitless, which is a ministry to disabled children and even to disabled adults as well. And we want to come alongside and we want to help families who are battling those kinds of things. And then when it comes to the more ethical type of questions that Amanda was asking, I think when those, again, today, a pastor, people on the church staff need to have some understanding of these things in order to give proper counseling to people on it. So, and this is where books like Scott's book come in handy.
And which book is the best one for that?
Moral Choices.
Moral Choices by Dr. Scott Rae. Check that out. 888-564-6173 is our phone number. Amanda, thank you for calling us today on Pastor's Perspective. Got about a minute till the break. Bobby Conway, quick question for you. You just finished reading this book, Hitler's Religion. So what was Hitler's religion? Some people say he was a Christian. Some say he was an atheist. What did you come up with after reading the book?
Well, I mean, Hitler was like Machiavellian in his approach to politics. And what that means is he'll say whatever he needs to say because might makes right to get the power of the people. So basically, when he's using Christian language, it's not because he believes in a Christian God. Richard Weikart argues that he was a pantheist. That would be his belief, according to him.
Interesting. All right. Got to take a break now. We'll be back with more of your questions at 888-564-6173. We've got Brian Broderson and Bobby Conway answering your questions, along with our guest, Dr. Scott Rae, the professor of Christian ethics at the Talbot School of Theology at Biola University. 888-564-6173 is the number to call us today. And to find out more about Dr. Scott Rae and Biola University, go to biola.edu or biola.edu, as I like to say. 888-564-6173. Welcome back to Pastor's Perspective, sponsored by Biola University, ranked as the most comprehensively Christian university in North America. My name is Brian Perez, and we are here till 4 p.m. Pacific time on this Wednesday, the 18th. Give us a call, 888-564-6173. Brian Broderson and Bobby Conway are here, along with Dr. Scott Rae, the professor of philosophy and Christian ethics at Biola University's Talbot School of Theology. 888-564-6173 is the number to call us today, and we're going to go back to the phones, beginning with Kathy in Huntington Beach. Go ahead, Kathy. What is your question for us today?
Hi. So my son had a major car accident where he was driving. His wife passed away. He's been told by different people it's God's will, and then his pastor said that is not God's will. We have free will. And I was wondering if you guys can explain that and give scriptures, maybe something that can help our family.
Is this recent, Kathy?
Yeah, it was like last month on the 10th.
Oh, my goodness. Well, we're so sorry to hear that.
And she's a young mom, so
Yeah.
it's very hard.
Very, very hard, yes. Yeah, well, I think, sometimes people say things just because they feel like they need to say something and they don't necessarily say the right thing. So it's important to be, very sensitive at a time like this. And so, things about, is it God's will, is it not God's will? This is really not the stuff to be talking about right now. These are God's will in matters. You have to go deep in a lot of things. So God allowed something to happen. Obviously, that I think you can take that. Why did God allow this to happen? This is the question that everybody has when something goes wrong in life. Why did God allow it? And this is where we have to fall back on the wisdom of God and the goodness of God, and just the reality that God knows things that we don't know. And I think we have to also remember that the person who has died it's hard to get your head around it at the moment, but, they have actually, some people use the term graduated, they've actually gone into the most wonderful experience imaginable. They've gone into the very presence of the Creator. They've gone into the very presence of the Lord who loves them. They are now free from suffering and all of those things. I often say to people when a loved one passes, they're home safe. Nothing can ever harm them again. Nothing can ever in any way cause them pain or grief or any of that. Now, that's for them, and it's important, I think, that we remember that. But then, of course, we're the people who are left behind. That's where the real difficulty is. So I would say for your son and for you and for everybody concerned, you want to try to focus on the fact that she is now with the Lord, and she's in a she's, like I said, she's in the ultimate place, and all who believe in Jesus you will be reunited. That's the wonderful thing about the gospel. This is not the end. This is a temporary break in the relationship, but you will be reunited with her, and you will be with her forever in a place where there will never be anything like this again. So you have to keep that in mind. And then for yourselves, you have to kind of come back and just say, okay, Lord, we don't understand why this happened, but we are going to just trust that you are going to help us through it. You might never understand this. You might go the rest of your life and never really be able to figure it out. But when you lean into the goodness of God, there's a book of the Bible, maybe you're familiar with it. It's the book of Job. And the book of Job is a long book, but it's the story of a man who suffers all kinds of loss, and he loses 10 of his children, and not to mention his wealth and possessions and his health. So he loses all of this. But the end of the story, and of course Job is perplexed like anybody would be. Why is this happening to me? He's a good man. He's actually, God says about him, there's nobody else like him in the world. His friends come along and they say, well, Job, you might not really be that good. There must be something about your life that God is punishing you. That's what they're getting at. And so anyway, but when you get to the end of the story, here's what happens. The Lord finally appears to Job, because Job, of course, he does have these questions. Why is this happening to me? And when the Lord appears to Job and he reveals who he is, Job says this. He says, I heard of you before, and now my eye has seen you. And he says, I repent in dust and ashes, which means basically, sorry I even asked any questions, because God himself answered all of Job's questions. And so what I'm saying to you is that your answers will be found in going deeper in your relationship with Jesus. And the more you just keep trusting him and getting to know him, you might not get the specific answer, but you'll realize, okay, the Lord is the answer, and He's got all of this covered. A great man that all of us here in the studio loved, a great Bible teacher, his name was Tim Keller. And Tim died very unexpectedly of, he came down with pancreatic cancer. And, of course, everybody thought, of course, Tim's going to be healed because he's Tim Keller. But he didn't. He wasn't healed. God took him home. But Tim Keller said this as he was writing the final book of his life. He wrote in the book, and knowing he was dying, he said, "This is where I've landed." He said, "If Jesus Christ rose from the dead, which I believe he did," he said, "then everything's going to be all right." And I think that that's where we have to go.
Kathy, thank you for your phone call today on Pastor's Perspective. 888-564-6173. Let's go to Murrieta. Stanley, welcome to the program. You're on with Brian Broderson, Bobby Conway, and our guest, Dr. Scott Rae.
Thank you guys for taking my call.
You're welcome.
So my question is, as far as Christians are concerned, should we own firearms? Should we conceal carry? Should we own guns? And I'm going to hang up so I can drive here because I'm on the road right now, but I want to hear what you have to say.
Yes, drive carefully. Dr. Scott Rae, we'll start with you.
I appreciate you hanging up while you're driving. That's a good thing.
That's right.
I wouldn't say that a Christian is obligated to own a firearm. The way I'd put it is that I don't think there's anything immoral about owning a firearm as long as you are well equipped to use it responsibly and you keep it out of the hands of people who could misuse it. The Bible, I think, is pretty clear that it gives individuals and communities a right of self-defense. I remember in reading through Nehemiah, for example, when they were rebuilding the city walls in Jerusalem after they come back from exile. Half the people worked on the construction. The other half were armed and served as armed guards to protect the workers from those who would come and try and interrupt the work. Similarly, when in the book of Esther, when the king gave a command to allow for genocide against the Jews, that was a law the Medes and the Persians said that could not be revoked. So in lieu of revoking it, the king actually gave the Jews the right to arm themselves and engage in self-defense. I think that continues into the New Testament here.
Yeah, Brian?
No, I agree. I think that's great. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Bobby?
you see Peter, taking out a sword and, taking off the ear of one of the guards that came to arrest Jesus, as if, he was carrying a weapon. He was armed. So I think that he used it unwisely in that moment, and Jesus rebuked him. But I think at the same token, there's an example of where you see that as well.
Some people might push back and say, well, didn't Jesus say in the Sermon on the Mount to turn the other cheek and go the extra mile and don't resist an evil person?
Yeah.
But those are not referring to mortal threats. Right? Those are referring to insults and just the things that would fall short of somebody actually threatening your life. So I don't think those actually apply to somebody who would come at you with a gun in order to try and kill you or your family. I think
right.
As St. Augustine put it, I can't obey the mandate to love my neighbor if I see my neighbor being attacked and I stand by and do nothing.
Yeah, and going back to the sword thing, Jesus says at a certain point, when he's going to send the apostles out into the world, he says, take a sword. And obviously, he'd already said those who take up the sword will perish by the sword. So he's not telling them to go out and spread the gospel through the sword. But what does he mean, take a sword? And they say, Lord, here's two. We've got two of them. He's like, okay, that's enough.
Don't overdo it.
But I think, again, as you said, Scott, I think clearly the implication there is you might need to defend yourself along the way.
So in that regard, and we've had this question before, when it comes to self-defense, like martial arts and things like that, that would be okay to...
I think, yeah, if it's being used genuinely for self-defense.
Yeah. And I think defense of others as well.
That's right.
Like you said.
Yeah.
We live in a violent world these days, and I think, it's crazy, the stuff that happens. And I think for people who are able to assist somebody who is maybe being molested in some way, that would be the right thing to do.
Yeah.
I mean, it would be the wrong thing to obviously stand by, like we see so much happening today. You know, you see somebody getting
Take out your phone.
beat to a pulp, and you just video it, and then it's horrible.
Yeah. Stanley, thanks for your phone call. Hope that answered your question. How about we go to Hemet? Here is Ray. Welcome to Pastor's Perspective, Ray. You're on with Brian Broderson, Bobby Conway, and Dr. Scott Ray. Thanks for calling 888-564-6173.
Well, thank you very much for answering my call. I don't know where to start, but at first I'll start. Brian's mother used to live where I live, over in Lidgerworld, in Laguna Hills. But anyway, my question was about abortion, and I'm pro-abortion, and I believe most of your listeners are pro-abortion and also pro-Israelis.
Wait. Pro-abortion or pro-life?
I'm sorry, pro-life. I always keep saying they're pro-life. Anyway.
Big difference.
Because we have a gentleman that's running for senator. But he said that he believes that a woman should be pregnant if it's for instant or rape, or a woman being in danger of losing her job. I just want to know what you guys think about that, because I think abortion is abortion, period.
Okay, so you said this person who's running for office said abortion is okay in cases of rape, incest, or if they're going to lose their job. Is that what you said?
No, their life, I think.
They're going to lose their life.
Okay. Why did I hear job? I don't know. But Scott, what would you say?
I think let's take the easy one first. And that is if the woman's life is genuinely threatened by the pregnancy, that's one thing. We should be clear about this too. The number of times when that is the case is exceptionally rare. We have gotten so much better in the last 20 or 30 years at handling high-risk pregnancies. And just, in fact, I've heard some physicians say that a woman's life really is hardly ever in danger
these days,
from a pregnancy. But if it is, the one example that I can think of is when a woman has what's called an ectopic pregnancy, where that's where the embryo implants in the fallopian tube instead of in the uterus. That is a fatal situation. And so generally what the physician does is just cut a little opening in the fallopian tube and allow the embryo to fall out of the tube and bleed into the woman's body where she spontaneously miscarries. And I think that the reason I think that's okay is because if you lose the mother, you're going to lose the baby also. In that case, it's clear you're going to lose them both. And in my view, it's better to save one life than none. And the baby's life is dependent upon the life of the mother. That's why I think the mother ought to take priority in that situation. And I think that's true in most of these cases where the mother's life is genuinely in danger. In the case of sexual assault or incest, I think your point, Ray, I think is right, that it doesn't really matter how a child is conceived, whether it's consensual sex or non-consensual sex. And in my view, I don't think it's morally right to commit a second act of violence on top of the first one by ending the pregnancy due to abortion. Now, I totally understand a woman, not wanting to carry a child that's conceived as a result of sexual assault. I think the law should allow that. Because the law is in imperfect mirror of our moral sentiments, and the law doesn't have to be morally perfect. We have as public policy. That's the way it is. It's compromise and limited objectives, and no law restricting abortion has any possibility of being passed into law if it doesn't contain this exception. So, I think morally is different than legally in this case. I would say, I wouldn't give a woman a lot of grief if she chose to end the pregnancy due to the sexual assault. I would say I would encourage her to carry the pregnancy to term and then put the baby up for adoption.
Yeah, what a challenging,
very tough
from a pastoral counselor, just from the point of view of a person who would give advice to somebody on that. I mean, you just have to be so incredibly sensitive, So,
and my response was just a moral one.
Yeah,
You would do a lot of things pastorally before you even went down that road.
Yeah, exactly.
Ethically.
Yeah.
Dr. Bobby Conway?
Yeah, one of the things I would say as it relates to, this idea of abortion, a lot of the argument is about a woman's freedom, the right over her own body. And, if we define right to mean that you can abort your child, then we've got the wrong definition of what we mean by right. And so I think that we need to change the definition because if we define it that way, we end up in a problematic way. And really, nobody has a right over their own body to do whatever they want with it. Like I can't just, use my hands to injure other people just because it's my body and I have a right to do with it as I would. So while we can be incredibly sympathetic to many of the situations that people find them in with not wanting to be pregnant, that doesn't mean that we have a right as defined by, people who are champions in the ultra, feminist movement to terminate a baby because of that right. That's a wrong definition. And again, if our definition of right ends up being that now I have a right to take a life, then we got the wrong definition.
Ray, thank you for calling us today here on Pastor's Perspective.
I was thinking, as Bobby was saying that, and obviously we all know this. This is the problem with this is it's when you put it into the framework of rights, then you just, that is the issue, right? Nobody's going to take away my rights. This is my right. And it becomes irrational. It just becomes purely emotional. And, I think, gosh, that's so challenging. And you really have to pray that people would, just all of a sudden maybe have an awakening in their conscience or something to realize that it's about more than your so-called rights here.
Yeah, and I think what we need to realize, too, is that the premise that underlies the claim that this is a right, I think, is false.
Yes.
That is, the premise is that the fetus, the unborn child, is a part of the woman's body.
Yes. Right.
Which is not true. It's dependent on the woman's body, which is different than actually being a part of it, but it's genetically distinct. 50% of the time it's a different sex.
Yep.
The whole bit. So I'd want to be careful that we don't reason from a premise that I think clearly is false.
Yeah. But that's the one that, it's my body, my body, my body. But what about the baby? That's the one thing that nobody ever wants to really seriously consider.
Yeah. Ray, thanks for your call. Ryan hung up, so we're going to go to Ray's neighbor in Hemet. Carlos, welcome to Pastor's Perspective. Are you there, Carlos? Okay, I think Carlos hung up, so we'll go to Jerusalem in Orange County, California. Hi there, Jerusalem. Welcome.
Hi, I had a question about...
Hold on, your phone sounds really, really weird. Or really cool. I mean, to a child, that might be, wow, look what my phone can do. Let's try this again. Go ahead, Jerusalem.
I had a question about it. My question was, why did Jesus accept the request of the demons when they said, cast this out to the pigs? Why didn't he just send them back to hell?
Wow. How old are you, Jerusalem?
I'm 11 years old.
11 years old. Great question. So, Dr. Bobby Conway, how would you answer that question?
Boy, that's a tough one right there, isn't it? Some people would argue, well, the pigs were considered unclean, so he cast them into, unclean swine or the pigs. Others would say because they need to embody something, and so he cast them into the pigs to embody them. This did create frustration with the community in the Decapolis region across the sea, because they realized the economic stakes were pretty high to have Jesus around if this was going to be what he was going to do with, the cattle. So I think in some ways, I don't know the exact answer. I'm probably just more content to say it could have been this or it could have been that. And it could have been A or B, as I just described. And maybe there's a C and a D that the guys want to share.
BB, is there a C or a D?
Well, I'm just, Jerusalem called was such a great question, and I just am afraid that I can't answer that question either. You know, when you ask a question like, why did God do something? Unless God tells you why he did it, sometimes you're not going to be able to know exactly why he did it. So this is one of those where you just have to say, well, okay, Jesus did it, and he did it for a reason that he didn't tell us exactly why he did it. But, he's the creator. He created the pigs. Even the demons he created, they weren't demons when he originally created them, but they rebelled and became demons. So this is where we just have to go back and say, the point of the story is not so much like why did, they go into the pigs instead of somewhere else. The point of the story is the power of Jesus over the powers of darkness, and he demonstrates that right there. Mm-hmm. So maybe that's a little too much for you, Jerusalem, but hopefully that's helpful.
Is it Jerusalem?
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks for calling us today on Pastor's Perspective. Let's try Carlos again really quick. Go ahead, Carlos.
Okay. Hey, how you guys doing?
Good. Get to your question. We've only got a couple of minutes left.
Thank you.
Okay, I got a real quick question. Listen. Okay, I got a brother-in-law, right? And he listens to people. He listens to Joel Osteen. Listen, I want to know how to explain to him that, as far as I'm concerned, Joel Osteen denies the deity of Christ. I want to be Christian with him, but I have to listen to him, listen to Joel Osteen all night. Is it me? Am I worried too much? Because I'm concerned about his he listens.
Okay. Yeah. We'll help you real quick.
Calm down.
Yeah.
Take a breath.
I could be wrong. I don't think Joel Osteen denies the deity of Christ. That's news to me if he does. Bobby, you might know whether or not he does. I don't think Joel Osteen is your best go-to guy if you want to really learn the Bible and exactly what the Christian faith is. His world is what you call the prosperity doctrine, and there's all kinds of problems with it. But on the other hand, I actually know people who have come to faith through the influence of Joel Osteen. And, sometimes he might just say a sentence that's accurate, and, God uses that. So unless he's denying the deity of Christ, I would not be too worried about it. I would just let your brother-in-law let God work in his life, and, the Lord will sort him out in time, I think. Bobby, do you know anything about that? Does he deny the deity of Christ? Have you heard of that?
No, I've never heard that either. Obviously he, is heavily into a positive message, and he's more of a motivational speaker and doesn't come down on things like sin, like the gospel would lay out. And that would be the big problem that I have. I think they get a half gospel with Joel.
Yeah. But ironically, remember a few years ago,
problem, but not that his doctrines are.
Remember a few years ago when they publicly asked him about homosexuality, and he just said, well, that's sin, according to the Bible.
He was very strong in affirming traditional marriage.
He was kind of more straightforward than other people that you would have thought, would maybe be more straightforward about it. So, so I think, Carlos, just pray for your brother-in-law and just trust that God's working in his life.
Be gracious when you interact with him.
Yeah.
For sure. And the more your brother-in-law learns about Jesus, he just might start thinking, I don't know about this Osteen guy. And then he'll start listening to
him on
us.
Pastor's Perspective. We'll help him out.
Yep. Carlos, thank you for your phone call today. We are out of time, but thank you very much for listening and for watching and for interacting with us by calling 888-564-6173. Not sure why I'm still giving out the phone number, because we're not taking any more questions. Until tomorrow, we will be here from 3 to 4 p.m. for Brian Broderson and Bobby Conway and our guest, Dr. Scott Ray. Thank you, Dr. Ray, for being on the program with us again.
My pleasure. Always great to be with you guys.
Please come back again. This was a great program, just like last week's. If you missed last week's, you can find that archived on Facebook and YouTube and Spotify and Apple Podcasts. God bless you guys. Thanks for listening. For Brian and Bobby and Dr. Scott Ray, I'm Brian Perez, and Pastor's Perspective was sponsored by Biola University, ranked as the most comprehensively Christian university in North America.